Hey, folks, welcome to the Battles of the First World War podcast. Joining us on the podcast this afternoon is Richard Sherman, author of Never Home, Remembering the Military Heroes Who Never Returned. From the book's website, neverhomeheroes.com, we can learn about Richard's background. In 2017, professional photographer and Navy veteran Richard Sherman embarked on a journey to visit and photograph all 23 American overseas World War I and World War II cemeteries. After 6 years and 8 trips to 3 continents, he published Never Home, Remembering the Military Heroes Who Never Returned. The book features dramatic imagery of all 23 cemeteries, from Normandy to Manila, and more than 50 biographies of individuals who, even in death, have never made it home. His company, Richard Sherman Photography, has operated as a certified, veteran-owned small business for the last 13 years. His artwork has been purchased by more than 30 VA medical centers, as well as dozens of private healthcare facilities, hospitality firms, and corporations. Richard is a former Wall Street analyst and was a partner at 2 boutique financial services firms. He holds an MBA from Georgetown University, a BA from Lehigh University, as well as certificates in videography and professional photography from the New York Institute of Photography. He is fluent in Spanish and speaks conversational French. Richard is a former Navy officer and Gulf War veteran and is a member of several organizations, including the VFW and the American Legion. Folks, Never Home is a beautiful book, and the journey inside it is one of deep gratitude and love for those Americans who made the highest sacrifice for their country and their comrades in arms. I'm really looking forward to this discussion. So, Richard, if I may, first, thank you for your service, sir, and
Thank you, sir.
welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for the warm introduction, and it's great to be with you. I know we've had a chance to chat a few times here, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation as well.
Yeah, so I know that introduction is probably pretty bare bones. Can you tell us a bit more about yourself?
No, that was actually a really great introduction. I appreciate that. I guess I would say, you know, I'm left brain and right brain person, right? How does a guy go from working on Wall Street as a partner to being a creative in the photography field? I'm kind of equally left brain and right brained, and I really enjoyed digging into the history and digging into the personal histories of the individuals that we'll talk about momentarily in Never Home Heroes. It's been as you mentioned, a 6-year journey. And, actually the idea, the actual planning started 7 years ago, and it's been an incredible journey of gratitude. You go there and you want to express your gratitude to those who gave everything, gave the full measure. And yet somehow you publish a book and somehow you think, well, I'm going to be sharing these things and these experiences with others, but there's something very deep in this experience, a very rewarding experience to go and visit these cemeteries and write this book, in that it's added immeasurably to my life. It's given meaning to my life and giving meaning to my work in a way that I never imagined when I started out.
Awesome. So you yourself, of course, like we mentioned, former Navy officer, you come from a family with a history of military service. How did that inform your idea for the book? And what about that conversation with that Ukrainian cab driver in Canada? Like, what inspired you?
Sure. Yeah. So, people like you're asking here, like sort of what is the inspiration for the book behind those two questions? And, most of those veterans today or active duty folks today were influenced by someone in their family or, a generation or 2 generations before them. And in my case, my father was a Korean War veteran. His brother was a bit older, served in World War II as a radioman on a destroyer. My godfather, my uncle on my mom's side, was a Vietnam veteran of the Navy, serving aboard the John F. Kennedy aircraft carrier. And so there was lots of conversations and lots of teasing and other things that go back and forth among the family. But it always was, my dad had a great love for the Navy, despite certain experiences that were obviously not warm or happy experiences for him. But I think I learned more about what it meant to my father over time as I became older. and being part of something like the armed services, really, being part of something that you believe in the mission, you believe in working for something that's bigger than yourself, really is really the key, I think, to being content or being happy in your life. And so, being around the table and listening to the stories, it started very early for me to think about joining the military. In college, as you mentioned, Lehigh University, two of my roommates, one was an ROTC for the Air Force, the other one was an ROTC for the Army. So there was lots of conversations about that, and I decided to raise my hand my senior year of college, and went to Officer Candidate School after graduation. And of course, with the military experience, we very early on learn about those who have gone before us, and their heroism and their valor and their courage. And so that's always in our minds, I think, as active duty or veterans, those experiences of those who've gone before us are brought into our minds very, very early in the indoctrination, in the boot camp experience, whatever you want to call it. But so I enjoyed my active duty experience, spent some time in reserves, and then let's see, that was the first Gulf War. So we fast forward to 2007 to answer your second question. Is there's as veterans, we think about those who are in harm's way today. As we're sitting here comfortably on a Saturday afternoon. Right now, we're recording in September. I know this will be probably broadcast in November, but we're in our comfortable environments and our safe environments. There are folks in harm's way at this very moment, and so those things are on our minds, I think, and never very far from our thoughts. And in 2007, I was working a financial services job and went up to Vancouver for a conference, and it's a long trip, and got into the cab and met the cab driver. I like to chat with cab drivers, and learned very quickly that the cab driver was a Ukrainian World War II veteran. So he was, like, I would suppose, early 80s at that time, but really a fascinating guy. He kept looking back as our conversation. I'll never forget looking at me in the rearview mirror, and I could see his face, and he had these blue eyes, like the color of glacier blue. And we had this amazing conversation, and he expressed to me his incredible gratitude for the American GIs in World War II. Here he was, a Ukrainian soldier in a very horrific situation, a tremendous fight in front of him against the Nazi war machine, and behind him, the Red Army, which, as we see today, there's quite a difference between being Ukrainian and being Russian. Right. And he expressed it's very difficult with the beatings, and heaven forbid you should turn around. The best thing that could happen would be to be beaten, if not shot. And so it was a very difficult period for the Ukrainian soldiers, fighting for their survival against maybe two very dangerous groupings of military combatants. And he was stunned. He was overwhelmed, really. That this is today we have history. We have the luxury of history, and we can analyze the wars and the decisions made in Dunkirk and in World War II, or the Italian campaign, or the Meuse-Argonne offensive. We can do that with the luxury of time. But here he was, as a World War II soldier, fighting in his own country, and it wasn't could not really, even now in his 80s, I suppose, understand why the Americans would leave the comfort of their home thousands and thousands and thousands of miles away, and suddenly appear in his country with courage and energy and determination to fight alongside the Ukrainians. It was miraculous to him, really, and so he was extremely grateful for that experience. And of course, while I acknowledge and realize the sacrifices of our World War I and World War II veterans in that moment of my life, it became much more rich in color, much more important to me with those words that he said. And he also mentioned, here they were, Ukrainian soldiers struggling for survival, and they would receive rations from the Red Army only once every 4 to 5 days. And the American troops, having left the comfort of their homes, were in their country, and they had rations to eat every day. And he said how amazing that was, that they could bring food so many thousands of miles, and here they were in their very own country, not being able to eat but once every 4 or 5 days. And the incredible compassion of the American GI, these little vignettes that we get through this experience of the book, and learning about the individuals, this incredible compassion to share their food in extreme duress with the Ukrainians meant the world to him. And so he was extremely grateful for the experience of American GI, and it became very personal for me at that stage. And of course, I'm working a different job. I'm working a financial services job, I'm working a lot of hours. And
Sure.
then fast forward to 10 years, a decade, I probably told that story in those 10 years, probably 50 to 100 times, because it was just an impactful conversation that I had with them. And then in 2017, I began working with Mary Virginia Swanson, who is arguably not arguably, but she's the top photography book consultant in the country. And we started to formulate a plan on how we would put together a book that expressed this gratitude, the sacrifice, the compassion of the Americans in World War I and World War II. In 2018, I began the process of going and photographing and visiting. Really, I was visiting them. I wanted to visit them, and being a photographer, fortunately, I was able to bring these cameras along and then bring other people with me to have the same type of experience that I had, the same emotional experience that I had in going to these cemeteries. And so between 2018 and 2023, the research and the photography was done, and then layout continued. And then in April of this year, 2024, the book was finally published.
Wow, wow, amazing, amazing. The book itself, sorry to repeat, we were talking before we started recording, but folks, the book itself, if you're watching the video on YouTube, you can see it right over my shoulder here. It's beautiful, beautiful. Like I love books. I love the feel of books, and having received this in the mail from you, like taking it out, it was like, oh man, like this is beautiful. And then the the quality of the paper, like in just turning the pages, but the photographs and the journey within. I spent a couple of days reading it front to back, and it was just very moving. And you can feel that essence of your mission of like gratitude all throughout. Like this was really really well executed, and it's such a beautiful book. Like the photos inside there. We'll get into it in a in a little bit here.
Well, yeah, thank you. And I should note, it's a 240-page book, and we worked really hard to print this in the United States. It's printed in the United States. It was important to us that they be printed in the United States. And the other thing is we've kept the price as low as possible. I mean, it's priced like a regular hardback you might find. And so the idea was this has to be accessible. It is not a book that is the capstone of my career, and it's an honorarium to me. It has nothing to do with me. It has to do everything with the individuals who sacrificed everything. And so it was quite a challenge to do that, the kind of the business challenge of that, but we were able to do it, and we're very happy with how it turned out.
All right. So in your own in your own life, like when did you first visit an American military cemetery, and what did that feel like to you?
I guess I went to graduate school, as you mentioned, at Georgetown, and so I lived across the street from Arlington National Cemetery.
Yep.
I suppose I went to Arlington I don't suppose, I know I went to Arlington as a young boy. I think I was 8 years old. My parents did, though. We lived in the Philadelphia area. It's very common to do the trip to see the Capitol and the memorials in Washington, D.C. So I can't say that I remember that experience, but I can remember that we went there, right? And so living, I guess at this stage, is after the active duty Navy. I'm in the reserves, and I'm living across the street from Arlington National Cemetery. I went there a bunch of times, and in fact, the adjacent Army base there is, being a reservist, we'd work out there. My wife and I would work out there all the time. So, yeah, Arlington was the first one, and went there many, many times over the course of 2 years or so.
Awesome, awesome. So I've myself, I'm familiar with the American cemeteries in France and Belgium, and of these, the Merzargon is the best known to me. The first, I would have to say, the first American military cemetery that I visited was Normandy. That was back in 2000. I was stationed in Germany, and my buddies and I, like, we actually drove from the Frankfurt, Germany area overnight all the way out to Normandy. Um, but I,
That's a long distance, yeah, right? I mean, you had to
yeah, that
only go
was
to the coast, yeah.
yeah, that was quite a quite a drive with no like Google GPS or anything back in those days, just a map. But yeah, so I remember, like, I remember the Normandy cemetery, but but quite honestly, like, this was just a couple of years after the film Saving Private Ryan had been released, and so I think the biggest memory that I have of that time is that path, the path that shows at the beginning of the film where the older um, Private Ryan is walking with his family, and I just remember being like, oh wow, this is right here. This is where the film was shot. And so, I mean, moving experience, of course, but like didn't quite sink in. But what really sank in was 2016. I visited the Meuse area for the 100th anniversary of the Battle of Verdun. I'm there with my son. It's February, and so we still call this day our America Day. We visited as many American sites as we could. It was a rainy, cold February day, raw, misty, and but I still remember driving through the village of Romagna, and we drive through, and we come up and turn the corner, and there is like the precision cut grass, and then the two eagles of the Meuse-Argonne cemetery, like right at the entrance. And I just remember like being stunned and being like, wow, this is I've never seen anything like this. And then driving onto the grounds of the cemetery and seeing the almost endless field of white crosses to your right as you're driving in, and just walking amongst them, walking up to the chapel and the loggias, and looking at the names, and just it. I will never forget that day, and being moved. And just as you said, like, once you that first time, once you're there, like, it's in your bones. Like, it's I feel like I also said before I started recording, like, you just feel the need to be there every time you go back. And if you don't have a plan to go back, you do start quickly making one of like, I want to go back there. I want to be back there with those guys. So this is I know you've had similar feelings. So, like, what's it like traveling year after year to visit these cemeteries in Europe and the Pacific, of which I have no experience?
Well, it becomes, as you and I were talking about before we started, it becomes part of your life, right? And we both shared, for your listeners, we both shared this same feeling, is like we'd like to, we're planning when's our next trip to go back and visit a cemetery, right? It's in your mind. So caveat emptor, if you haven't been to a cemetery, please go, and but be warned, because you'll it's not going to leave you, right? That experience will not leave you. It will be part of you, and you'll think about it, and you'll want to go back, and you'll think about visiting other ones. It becomes part of you, and rightly so. I mean, it's exactly what it should be, right? And I think big credit to the American Battle Monuments Commission, which we'll talk about in a minute. Big credit um, to all the guides like yourself that really are able to convey the context of what was going on. As we're in the same camp. All of us are here today, including your listeners. We don't. We were afraid that we'll forget. We're afraid that we're going to forget. And for our younger generation, right? World War One, even World War Two, is that kind of that fuzzy era where it's just kind of over the horizon of realism for them, right? It could be the Middle Ages, it could be the Roman Empire, it could be World War One. It just seems like some time in the past, and they get through their history class, except for those that are really passionate about it. They get through and they get a couple of quotes, and they know who wins and loses, and maybe some generals' names. But after that, it's on to other things in their lives. And I think that the fear for us is that I mean, this is 100 years ago. It's recent history. It's not the Middle Ages. It's not the Dark Ages. It's recent history, and it's real lives. And that's what the book really is all about. There. I'm sure you've read Lengel's book on To Conquer Hell about the
Mhm.
Meuse-Argonne offensive. Just a long book. I mean, for me, Meuse is to World War One as Normandy is to World War Two, and I
Right.
suspect you feel very much the same way. Um, it, it's an extraordinary cemetery. It's an extraordinary the awakening of the U.S. Modern military entering into World War One. We were I'll say this slowly, the 17th largest standing army in the world behind the Portuguese at that time.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
here in a desperate World War, the First World War, a desperate situation for our allies. America awakens, and they poke the bear, and suddenly we realize what America and the Americans were, and could become. And so it is important that we go and visit and we remember, and that once we go, it's great that we want to go back.
You mentioned the passage of time and how I totally agree. Like the World War One, all living participants have now passed on. In World War Two, we're rapidly approaching the same. So it is, it's really weird. Like as I say weird because I can't think of a better word, but like as a kid growing up in the '80s, I remember all the old guys, all the guys with white hair, using canes, like all those old guys, like they were all World War II vets, all of them, and they were just like a pillar of like your understanding of the world. Like all of these old guys all fought in World War II. That's the way of the world. That's the world that we grew up in,
Yeah.
and now they're all fading out, and especially now, like so now, fast forward, some 4 decades, those numbers are getting thinner and thinner and thinner, and now recognizing that World War II is soon also going to be in the same place as World War One, and just like you say, like it may as well be the Roman Empire and Henry VIII or the Tudor
Yeah, right.
dynasty or something. Like it's all ancient history. There's nobody around who can talk about it, or soon there won't be. So these stories, and like you said, these people, like these are real people just like us. So what's really cool about your book is that you will photograph a headstone, one of the crosses, and then you tell us the story of that particular person, and I found that very moving. So, which stories of the fallen stay with you the most? Was there one that really resonated with you?
Well, do, do we have 3 or 4 hours? I, I mean, they all resonate for a variety of reasons, right?
Sure.
Once you get to do the research with them, you kind of get to know them, and so they kind of become part of you, right, or part of your friends group, if you will, right? And
Yep.
while I know very little about them, I worked hard to get to know something about them. So there are, for example, world, you mentioned Verdun, you know I don't think most Americans realize the bloodshed at Verdun, right,
Right.
between February and say July of 1916. 200,000 casualties on the French side, 200,000 casualties on the German side, and really by October, no land had changed hands. I mean, it's
Right.
just a killing field. It's extraordinary, sad experience. But I mean, we could talk about various stories. Reuben Rivers, World War II African American fellow, served under Patton, received his family received his Medal of Honor in 1997 under President Bill Clinton, and what an extraordinary experience that was, particularly in that his commanding officer who nominated him, it was a Rivers was a tank commander in the All Black Panther unit, was immediately nominated by his commanding officer for the Medal of Honor. But as you know, many of you may know, Patton didn't believe much in the Medal of Honor, and certainly I think it was unlikely that an African American tank commander under Patton was going to receive it. But his sister received it in 1997, and in that audience, was a commanding officer, David Williams, who had nominated him 50 some years earlier. Extraordinary, right? That he never forgot. I mean,
Yeah.
it meant so much to him that he now of age is at the White House. But there are three individuals from Moose in the book.
Yes.
You could fill the book, several books up, just with the stories from Moose Argonne. Uh, William Salson. I'm lived, in New Jersey for 20 some years. Salson was a cab driver or chauffeur driver before the war in Newark, New Jersey, and deploys as a supply sergeant, and he ultimately receives a Medal of Honor. He's killed at the age of 23, and he's killed not as we think about in many of our Medal of Honor recipients, and incredible acts of violence, but incredible acts of compassion, and trying to aid one of his fellow soldiers and bringing relief and water to him back and forth over the grounds to try to save this guy, and is killed, and he's interred in Moose-Argonne. So that's one of them. He's a Medal of Honor recipient. Another one is Matej Kokak from
Yes.
Hungary. He was a 36-year-old sergeant from the Marine Corps, one of 8 Marines to receive the Medal of Honor in World War One. Kokak actually received 2 medals of honor. At that time, the Medal of Honor, there was an Army Medal of Honor and a Navy Medal of Honor. And so, serving with the Army units, he received essentially 2 medals. Well, his family received 2 medals of honor. And of course, now we just have a single Medal of Honor, not one in each of the different services. But he was killed storming. Incredibly, I think it was at least his 3rd documented machine gun nest, and was ultimately killed by machine gun fire, and received the Medal of Honor for his heroism and courage. And of course, is interred there at Moose-Argonne, where there are a number of Marines. It's kind of sad. Coming from the kind of the blue side as a Navy guy and having served with the Marine Corps, there aren't a lot of Marines or Navy that are actually interred in our 23 World War One and World War II cemeteries, because many of them, particularly in the Pacific campaign, which you referred to, are lost to the seas or lost to the beaches somewhere, or bodies are never recovered. And so Kokak was a Marine, and is, as I mentioned, one of 8 to have received the Medal of Honor, and his body lays at Moose-Argonne. So that's another another story. And there's not many the individuals who received 2 medals of honor, but an immigrant from Hungary and on to the Marine Corps, and incredible courage and determination. It's just a couple of the Medal of Honor recipients that are laid to rest at Moose-Argonne.
Quick, this brings up a question. So, kind of pivoting over to the Pacific really quick. For those service members like lost at sea, how are they honored in like the cemeteries in the Pacific?
Yeah. So we just have the Manila American Cemetery from World War II over in Manila in the Philippines, and it is an extraordinary cemetery. You would again, words are tough to. You would appreciate the experience of going there. It's on beautiful rolling hills right in the city, and it goes on. Sadly, covers a lot of area. I think by footprint, just a little bit smaller than Normandy, but with the rolling hills, it looks larger. And so I don't know, 140 some acres. I don't remember the exact number, but it's a beautiful cemetery. And sadly, to answer your question, those who are lost are listed on the walls. In their case, walls of the missing, not just a wall of the missing. Those who have been lost to sea or never recovered are listed in our cemeteries on the wall or walls of the missing. And in Manila, there's over twice as many individuals listed on the walls of the missing than there are actually interred. And so it makes it the cemetery with the most individuals memorialized when you combine the walls of the missing coupled with those who are interred. It's the largest number of individuals memorialized, but it's a sad fact that there are over twice as many that have not been recovered that have been actually buried at Manila.
Wow. Yeah, different nature of the fighting there. Yeah. In your project and in your travels and everything, what sort of assistance, if any, or guidance did you receive from like U.S. government agencies? Principally, I'm thinking of the ABMC, American Battle Monuments Commission. Also, any any assistance or guidance from locals, like in within the areas of the cemeteries?
I would say in most of the trying to think of any locals. There's some interesting interaction with locals. So, but guidance, I would say no. The American Battle Monuments Commission is extraordinary, right? I think there's maybe like 500 employees. It's part of our government. It last year, 2023, it celebrated its 100th anniversary. It started out in 1923 under John Pershing, who was, of course, the head of the American Expeditionary Force in World War One, and the right guy to take over this newly established agency. In the 30s, it started to take over the cemeteries, but it started out with just building monuments and maintaining monuments. But uh, today, I think, like I said, about 500 people or so. I think 80%, roughly 80%, are foreign nationals. And so you've been to Moose, you've been to Waz, you've been to the various cemeteries. You see many of the locals that are there taking incredible care of these headstones and these beautiful grounds. I challenge anyone to find a piece of trash or a cigarette butt or plastic or anything on these grounds, and they do a magnificent job. And they were great to work with. They were very accommodating to me. They were helpful with some background information. They were helpful in putting me in touch with the superintendents so I could coordinate my visits. Of course, being a photographer by myself, I didn't tread, at least according to me, I didn't tread heavily. It's not as though I came in with a film crew and drones and all kinds of stuff like that. But still, it's important because there has to be access to everybody and it has to be open to everybody. So they were incredibly supportive in helping me get to the cemeteries and being able to photograph, and the superintendents and their teams were pivotal in getting me some information on locations of cemeteries. And so I should say a bit about the book is that the individuals, the 54 biographies that are in the book, obviously we've talked about, Matej Kokak and artillerymen and infantrymen and, fighter pilots and the like. That's very known to anyone who thinks about the military. And yet I included in the book a number of jobs or occupations in the military that could be relatable, I guess I would say, to
Mhm.
those who maybe don't come from a military background. So nurses, which were incredible stories of the nurses in here that, particularly in World War One, went ahead by a year or more of the American Expeditionary Force to help our British and French allies during World War One. So there's doctors, there's chaplains, ambulance drivers, there's members of the OSS, which was the predecessor of the CIA, by
Right.
all rights, spec ops guys that would parachute in behind enemy lines to foment, to gather intelligence and
Yep.
foment, um, well, cause havoc, I guess I should say, behind enemy lines. So there's a number of jobs that maybe we don't think of immediately, but they're important so we could relate to the individuals, even for those who maybe didn't serve. And so the American Battle Monuments Commission were very helpful in telling me, obviously locations and sharing some background information, sometimes photos, sometimes brief histories, or places where I can go to get more research. I can't say enough good things about the folks from the American Battle Monuments Commission.
Yeah, and they're wonderful. And in fact, you earlier spoke about like the sense of mission, and that is a theme that comes up with the ABMC folks all the time. Like when you speak with them, when you speak with the superintendents, and I'm gonna give shout outs here to Bruce Malone of the American Muzargan Cemetery, who is just a wonderful guy. Joe Alato of the San Miguel Cemetery, and then Steve and his assistant Stefan of the Psalm American Cemetery out in Boni. It's funny, finishing with Steve out at the Psalm Cemetery. He actually brought it up, and he's not the only one, but like he says, like, you know what, like working here, and I'm paraphrasing, but like working here is, I always know my mission. It's these guys. It's these guys all the time. And if I'm ever like, if I feel stressed or caught up in the day to day work stuff, like I take a walk through the cemetery, and I instantly like remember why I'm here, and what we're doing and why we're doing it. And Joe and Bruce, like they've also spoken in similar terms, and it's just always so moving to be like, to hear that, and to just feel like how committed they are to preserving the memory of these guys, and then honoring them. And it's just always very moving, really moving.
Yeah, yeah.
So
I think it's contagious, right? I mean, Bruce has been there for a long time at Moose, and um, you can feel the passion when you talk to them. I mean, it is contagious for sure.
so I think now that I talked about how I first visited the Merzargan cemetery, uh, in your book, your photos of the Normandy cemetery, and you visited there on a foggy day, and that also, like, that was kind of like my favorite part of your book. Those photos, God, those are ones that really stuck with me. So is there one cemetery or any one visit that that sticks with you, like while you were out doing the work for you for this book?
How much time do you have? No,
Again, yeah.
right, exactly.
24 hours.
Well, right, and thanks for the kind words on Normandy. Normandy and Netherlands, I visited twice, and so right. I mean, it's Normandy, and so photography is a great passion for me and a great hobby for many people. But when you talk to people about, say, hey, I went to Moose, or I went to Normandy, I went to Somme, or whatever, and you ask them what that experience was like, they usually struggle for words because we don't really have words to describe that experience. And so that's where photography and videography really come in. They fill in where we don't have words for it. You can't, being at the Normandy for the 75th and photographing that. First time I visited was 2018 on that first trip over Memorial Day, and then again for the 75th. That was 2019, of course. But that's an unforgettable experience, and standing there and touching and shaking hands of the World War II veterans. And there's a 2-page spread in the book that I'm particularly pleased with how it turned out, where I quickly put together a panoramic image. I took a series of, I think it was 5 or 7 images, as all the veterans from World War II were lined up in their chairs, their mobile chairs, and was able to get the all of them across a 2-page spread. And so that, to me, it's hard to concentrate sometimes, right? Because, like, this is like a moment in your life that you want to live, but here you are kind of working hard, trying to memorialize, trying to capture it for others. And so it was challenging just to keep my focus on that. You mentioned the Somme. The Somme is the first cemetery I visited on a Memorial Day weekend. Did a lot of driving that weekend in 2018. It was the very first cemetery I visited. It is relatable and accessible to the heart, in that it's not a massive cemetery, but a critically important story behind it. I'll skip the history, all the history behind it. But after the Verdun offensive, of course, in 1916, then the Allies started their response in the Somme sector, and it was similarly horrible results and horrific bloodshed in the Somme. But it is a beautifully elegant, sort of plus sign cross type of structure. It's in a rolling farms and beautiful towns, little tiny towns that you have to drive through. But it's very rural compared to many of the other places. Say, for instance, Suresnes, right in Paris. It's
Right.
a very different feeling to go to the summer. And so it was a great first experience for me for a lot of reasons. One, the tenor or the cadence of the project, the importance of the project was set there. Among the very first grave headstones that I visited was an individual with the last name Sherman. His name is Clyde Sherman. I have no relation to Clyde Sherman, but that was kind of like, I don't know, a wake up call. Like,
Yeah.
if you didn't want to know who these individuals were beforehand. When you see your last name on the headstone, among the first headstones that you visited, something tells you you're onto something, and you've got an interesting journey ahead of you. And so Clyde Sherman's in our book. And then the second part of the Psalm experience was, it's I didn't do the surrounding areas. In my presentations, when I do presentations to organizations, I show this picture. But there's a little hill, and I never pronounce it right. I think it's Bonnet, the little town up on the hill behind the Somme. And this was a Memorial Day weekend, my first experience. Pull into the parking lot, greeted by the ABMC and the staff there, which was very welcoming. Start to get to photographing. People start coming in. The uh, uh, the First Division and the memorial gear come in, and there's flags and the drapeau from the French are coming in. And then I look up on the hill, and up on the hill there are people just streaming down from the town, local French folks dressed to the nines in their suits and their dresses. There's a picture of this in the book. You see the ladies in their beautiful dresses and the men in their suits coming down to pay respects over Memorial Day to our fallen in the Somme. And again, you think you know stuff when you start, and you think you know where you're going. You really realize you think. I think it's important. They really think it's important to remember it, because here they are, 100 years out, and they're coming out of their homes dressed to the nines, dressed like a wedding, and coming down and remembering our fallen heroes, at the Somme. So that was a really, really pivotal experience for me. I know we have a limited amount of time. We could talk about all of them, but
Sure.
I think the Psalm put me on a very important cadence for the rest of the book.
Wow. Yeah. Amazing. Amazing. So, where can folks buy your book?
Well, the project's website is, as you alluded to at the beginning, is neverhomeheroes.com, and there's a link to buy the book. There's a specific page where you can go and buy the book. If you want to go directly, you can go to neverhomeheroes.etsy, ETSY, neverhomeheroes.etsy.com, and that'll take you right to the page, and you can buy a copy or a signed copy of it. And so that's where the book is available. I think, as I mentioned before, we've kept the price to be very reasonable, because we want the stories, I want the stories to be told. And that's really what, just like your passion, Mike, is like in your tours and guides and guiding, is like, let's get this. We can't tell the story too many times, because they really deserve more than to be remembered as a statistic in a newspaper article or in a history book. They deserve to be remembered by name. And I will say, you talked about Moose. I think it was 19. I was at Moose and over Memorial Day, and it's a luminary ceremony where they
Yes.
read the names. They place candles on top of each of the headstones, and they read the names. And so I arrived before. I was fortunate to get in the cemetery, thanks to the ABMC and Bruce's team, to allow to get in before the official opening of the cemetery to do some photography. And I was there throughout the day. And at the end of the day, there are still names being read at the microphone at the top, and they're still remembering the individuals, because there's so many names, but they read their names and their hometowns and their dates, and various volunteers stand there, and it's just extraordinary, moving experience.
Yeah, amazing, amazing. Folks, the book is Never Home: Remembering the Military Heroes Who Never Returned. In the episode notes, we will have links to both Rich's website and that link to the Etsy site, to where you can buy the book directly. Yeah. Rich, thank you so much for coming on the podcast and taking time on this Saturday afternoon.
It's been great. I appreciate your passion and the work that you do, and it's great to chat about this. May see you over at Moose or Sam or up
Yeah, I hope
Belgium
so.
one of these days. Yes, sir.
I hope so.